This series is dedicated to Brother Steve Coakley.
So the book one says that there's a relationship between the Boulè and Skull and Bones. Let's get to another part of what it says. It also says that it's an interesting phenomenon about the Boulè. It says, you know, the Boulè started in 1904. The NAACP and the Urban League started only years later. The other black male fraternities and black female sororities actually were founded with the sanction of the beast to counteract the grassroots movement of Marcus Garvey.
Can I make you my girl? Do you have the time? Lord? Can I make you my girl? Do you have the time? Lord?
When we left off last episode, Marcus had migrated to England, anxiously anticipating a new adventure upon the hallowed streets of London. A great opportunity, as Marcus saw, to formalize his position in society through acquiring worldly education and experience. Fellow Jamaicans like Claude McKay, who was from a well-to-do Jamaican family of Ashanti descent, was a fanatic of all things British, wrote glowingly of Jamaica's colonial savior. Rhetoric of the like energized the imaginations of Marcus. Upon arriving in London, finding steady income was elusive for Garvey, rendering him to swallow his pride and ask for public assistance. Eventually, Marcus did find work on the docks in London. While working at the docks, Garvey met several West Indian men with dreams of similar exploits, who had all but rolled snake eyes on their prospects for good fortune, and were now prospecting the next ship for a prodigal return home. According to Garvey historian Colin Grant, during this time at the dockyard, a brother seaman plugged Garvey into the new black drop in London, the African Times and Orient Review. Bruce wasn't just prominent in elite black circles, he had cracked the ceiling. His connections among prominent politicians set the course for his writings to appear in several papers even before the year 1900. He joined the Afro-American League in 1890. What is the Afro-American League, you ask? The Afro-American League is actually the predecessor to the NAACP, but with far less success. The League again tried to revive itself 8 years later, changing its name into the National Afro-American League. Founded by quite possibly the blackest man in the movement, Timmy Tom Fortune, the council eventually disbanded due to infighting among its list of members, which included Boulè opponents Booker T. Washington and W.E.B Dubois. But Timmy Tom, like Bruce Gritt, was a popular journalist and Pan-Africanist whose clout wasn't completely hitched to the dying League. Fortune was also a publisher of a successful black newspaper called The New York Age, and enjoyed personal relationships with the same prominent Republicans as did John E. Bruce, the man up in Harlem. Even before screening Garvey on American soil, Bruce had been working as a contributor for the African Times and Orient Review, the same publication previously occupied by Marcus and run by Dusè Muhammad Ali. In 1911, Gritt partnered with Dutch Caribbean immigrants Arturo Schomburg to create the Negro Society for Historical Research. Schomburg was born in Puerto Rico to German Jewish immigrants directly connected to the slave trade. The Schomburg family, which is the same lineage as the Bergman family out of Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands, can trace its history all the way back to Frederick Hermann Schomburg, Duke of Schomburg. The name Bergman is simply a transmutated variation of the same name, Hermann Schomburg, dropping the first two syllables and inversing the remainder. Many of these Spanish, Dutch, German, Jewish immigrant families have changed their family surnames into numerous literary forms, possibly to conceal their true identities. Schomburg is also considered one of the intellectual leaders of the Harlem Renaissance, to the degree that New York Public Library named a special divisional collection in his honor under the financing and philanthropy of the Carnegie Foundation and the Julius Rosenwald Foundation. The division was named the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Within the crux of this narrative, Ernestine Rose played the role of the crossover culture librarian. She purchased much of Schomburg's work in her attempts to create programs for African Americans. This Ernestine Rose should not be confused with Ernestine Pulaski Rose, who was lovingly referred to as the first Jewish feminist. This original Ernestine Rose, born Rose Pulowska, was born into a noble Polish aristocratic family who can trace its ancestry back to the ruling families of Poland and Ukraine, including Boleslaw the Curly and the Pataki dynasty. Ironically, Ernestine Rose 2.0, the feminist librarian and sympathizer of the Black plight, was also well entrenched in Jewish, socialist, and communist circles. But Original Recipe is widely considered a pioneer of women's suffrage, whose contemporaries include Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, and Susan B. Anthony, a regular Mount Blushmore of women's rights. Ironically, Rose was an avowed atheist, yet her father was a prominent rabbi. According to Charles Summerby, she was labeled by a newspaper a female atheist 1,000 times lower than a prostitute. Despite her unpopularity, she still found favor amidst her religious counterparts as a champion for women's rights, as did Diet Rose 2.0, who had been essential in acquiring the collection of Arturo Schomburg, who had a career relationship with John E. Bruce. Both men founding the Negro Society for Historical Research. This endeavor highlighted and specialized in the cooperation between American, African, and West Indian scholars. One of these West Indian so-called scholars was Hubert Harrison. Born in St. Croix, Harrison became a protege of Arturo Schomburg, and to a lesser degree, John Bruce. Harrison was also an atheist and held court with some of the top Darwinists of the time. Harrison often contended with top Christian ministers, with some of his lectures breaking out into riots between Christians and his supporters. Hubert also congregated in circles of the white and beige elite, chopping it up with people like Rothschild Francis, Bill Hayward, and Patrick Quinlan, who was a leading member of the Socialist Party, as was Harrison. At some point during Garvey's first American lecture tour, or soon thereafter, Garvey met Hubert Harrison. In several ways, their lives are linked together. Their strongest link was John Edward Bruce and Arturo Schomburg, who of course were both Prince Hall Freemasons. Bruce Gritt wrote the book Prince Hall, the founder of Negro Masonry, proofs of the legitimacy of Prince Hall Freemasonry. Indeed, Bruce was substantial in the involvement of Prince Hall Freemasonry and their petition for recognition within the greater Freemasonic body. Quote, when Garvey sat down to compose the constitution of the brave new UNIA, he drew heavily on the charters of other fraternal benevolent organizations like the Black Freemasons. A life insurance policy formed one of the central planks of the UNIA Book of Laws, providing death benefits to members. This was in line with other fraternities and was particularly attractive to Black people who were frequently denied such coverage by insurance companies. The UNIA's promise of a lump sum of $75 toward every member's funeral moved the specter of the pauper's grave that overshadowed their lives. Peace and death then, but the ascent of the organization was most definitely on prosperity in life. Mutual improvement associations were nothing new. Garvey's innovation was an attempt to wield commercial and cultural aspirations onto the body of the soon-to-be improved Negro. The source of the numerous titles enshrined in the UNIA handbook, including High Chancellor, Chaplain General, Potnet, and Supreme Commissioner, could also be traced back to African Freemasonry. Garvey borrowed some of the nomenclature along with aspects of its philosophy. The anachronistic sounding Potnet was an abbreviation of the Imperial Potnet of the ancient Egyptian order of the nobles of the mystic shrine, Black Shriners, made famous by the peerless Black Mason, Prince Hall. In a prevailing climate of political impotence and disenfranchisement, only the Masons and parallel fraternities provided opportunities for Black collective organization outside the church. The cautious and clever Prince Hall was just the kind of figure whom Bruce believed should serve as a model of shrewd leadership. End quote.